The CIA came up with a bold plan to steal a Russian submarine right in the middle of the ocean. On board were nuclear missiles capable of wiping out 50 major cities, as well as top-secret technology. The Americans knew if they got caught, it would mean the start of World War III. But despite the huge risk, they went through with it. This true story began with something that seemed nearly impossible and ended with an operation that changed the rules between superpowers forever. A February morning, a secret military base in Kamchatka. In the early darkness, a steel monster slowly approaches the pier. The submarine K-129, nearly 300 feet of deadly metal. On board are 3 R-21 ballistic missiles, each 60 times more powerful than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. Captain Vladimir Kobzar steps up onto the bridge. The icy ocean wind hits his face hard. 38 years old, awarded the Order of the Red Star, with a spotless reputation. For him, this was supposed to be the final mission. After returning, a promotion and a shore office awaited. But Kobzar didn't know he would never return home. His wife Irina is packing her husband's suitcase. She places the letters he'll read on long underwater nights. Family photos. She's used to these farewells, but something feels different this time, as if she's saying goodbye forever. On the other side of the base, the submarine's deputy commander, Alexander Zhuravin, kisses his wife and 8-year-old son goodbye. The boy asks, "Dad, when will you be back?" "In 2 months, son. I promise it's a promise he won't be able to keep." The crew of K-129, 98 men, young sailors, some barely 20, seasoned petty officers with faces weathered by salt and wind. Each one has a family back home. Each one has plans for the future. None of them know their submarine is about to become the target of the most daring theft in history. K-129 departs from shore. It heads south toward the Hawaiian Islands, a routine patrol, or so the crew believes. But in the captain's safe is a sealed envelope with secret orders, to be opened only in open ocean. What's inside the envelope? An order to launch a nuclear strike on American bases? Coordinates for a hidden mission? Or something even more terrifying? The first days of the mission go smoothly. The submarine sails on the surface. The crew gets used to life at sea. Each sailor is allowed 1 liter of water per day for everything: drinking, washing, laundry. Fresh water is more valuable than gold. The narrow compartments smell of diesel and human sweat. 100 men inside a metal tube underwater. It's a test not only of the body, but also of the mind. But the sailors of K-129 are professionals. They know their job well. Captain Kobzar steers the sub steadily along its route. In his cabin is a photo of his wife and a letter he never had the chance to finish. "My dear Irina, I don't know if this letter will ever reach you, but I want you to know I think of you every minute." In the engine room, Chief Mechanic Vladimir Kostyushko checks the instruments. At home, his wife is expecting a baby. He dreams of being there for the birth, but fate will decide otherwise. Radio operator Alexei Volkov carves his initials into his knife handle, dreaming of showing it to his children after the mission, not knowing that this knife will become the only witness to his fate. On March 8th, K-129 was supposed to contact the base. The duty radio operator in Kamchatka sits by the receiver all night, turns the knobs, adjusts the frequencies. Silence. March 9th. Still nothing. Panic spreads at the Pacific Fleet headquarters. Admiral Victor Digolo hasn't slept in 3 days. Red eyes, shaking hands. He commands the division that includes K-129. And he knows something terrible has happened. The USSR has never before lost a submarine with nuclear missiles on board. It's every naval commander's nightmare. A nightmare that suddenly became real. Digolo gives the order. Start the largest search operation in Soviet naval history. More than 30 ships and submarines head to sea. Around 50 aircraft take to the skies. They comb the ocean, looking for any sign of K-129. Looking for the sub, wreckage, oil slicks, life jackets, anything. But K-129 seems to have vanished into the ocean depths. The families of the submariners wait at home. Irina Kobzar goes to the naval headquarters every day, demands information. The answers are vague. Searches are underway. Nothing certain yet. 8-year-old Zhuravan's son asks his mother every evening, "Where's Dad?" She doesn't know what to say. "Daddy's at sea, son. Daddy's working." But there's no work left for Daddy, only the darkness of the ocean abyss. Weeks go by, then months. The search operation turns into a formality. Everyone understands that K-129 will not be found. The ocean is too vast, the depth too great. In September, the command issues a dry report. Submarine K-129 was lost during active duty. All crew members are presumed dead. Presumed. That word means the families only receive a one-time payout equal to 2 months of military salary. And that's it. K-129 is simply removed from the Navy's roster as if it never existed. Irina Kobzar receives the official letter and cries in an empty apartment. Her husband has become a ghost, a man who, officially, no longer exists. But what neither the widows nor the Soviet Navy commanders know is that the location of K-129 is already known to their greatest enemy. Thousands of miles away from the tragedy, on the 5th floor of the Pentagon, there is a secret department. The sign reads Department of Naval Operations. Behind this name hides a division so classified that even most Pentagon employees have never heard of it. Here work the people whose job is to know everything about enemy submarines, where they are, what weapons they carry, and most importantly, where they go down. Back in the 1950s, the Americans created a unique underwater listening system. Hundreds of hydrophones on the ocean floor pick up every sound. Each submarine leaves a unique acoustic signature, like a fingerprint. When specialists analyze the recordings from March, at first they find nothing unusual. Typical ocean noise, sounds of passing ships. But on a second listen, they hear something strange. An explosion, not an earthquake, not a volcanic eruption, not a weapons test, a real explosion, powerful, muffled, deadly. The coordinates point to a location between Kamchatka and Hawaii, right where K-129 was supposed to be. In the Pentagon hallway, analyst Thomas Shannon looks at the acoustic graphs and mutters to his colleague, "If this is what I think it is, we just found a treasure. But if we get caught with it, they'll call us pirates and shoot us like sea bandits." For the Pentagon analysts, this discovery was like finding buried treasure. A Soviet submarine with nuclear missiles, secret codes, and advanced technology lies at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. If they could recover it, the US would gain access to the enemy's greatest military secrets. But there's one problem. The depth in that area is 3 miles. No one in the world knows how to lift such heavy objects from that depth. It's technically impossible, and it's also theft. K-129 belongs to the USSR. Trying to raise it means stealing military property from a hostile nation in the middle of the Cold War. If the Americans are caught, World War III will begin. But at the Pentagon, there are people for whom the word impossible is just a starting point. John Parangosky began his CIA career right after the agency was founded. The son of an immigrant from the Russian Empire, he helped develop the legendary U-2 spy planes. He was the kind of man who could turn science fiction into reality. When the CIA was given the task of raising a Soviet submarine from the ocean floor, 50-year-old Parangosky became the obvious choice to lead the operation. He assembled a team of the best engineers, scientists, and military experts. In a top-secret office, the brainstorming began. How do you lift 1,000 tons of metal from 3 miles deep? They considered the wildest ideas, attaching rockets to launch it to the surface, filling it with gas to float like a balloon, blowing up the ocean floor to raise the wreckage with the shockwave. All were rejected as either unrealistic or too dangerous. Only one option remained, to build a giant ship capable of lifting K-129 and hiding it inside itself. But explaining the construction of such a vessel would be impossible. Any spy would understand its true purpose. They needed a cover story, and that's when Parangosky had a brilliant idea. Manganese. In the late 1960s, mining minerals from the ocean floor was considered the industry of the future. They could build a ship supposedly for deep-sea manganese mining. Who would suspect anything? But the project had to look believable. They needed a company rich and eccentric enough to pull off such a stunt. And that's when Howard Hughes entered the scene. Billionaire, aircraft designer, film producer, playboy. a man who collected airplanes the way others collect stamps. If Howard Hughes decided to mine manganese from the bottom of the ocean, no one would question it. A wildly rich, eccentric building, a wildly expensive toy. The scheme was multi-layered. The CIA secretly funded Hughes's company. Hughes's company publicly orders the construction of a ship for manganese mining. No connection to the government is visible. The operation is given the codename Azorian. Work begins on designing a ship like nothing the world has ever seen. A ship capable of doing the impossible. Imagine standing on the roof of the Empire State Building. In your hands is a 3-mile-long fishing rod. On the hook, a claw the size of a car. Your task is to lower the hook to street level, grab a tank, and lift it back to the rooftop. And you must do it without anyone in the city noticing. That's roughly what the CIA's mission looked like. It took 4 years to design and build the Global Explorer, a ghost ship that officially didn't exist. Hundreds of millions of dollars. Thousands of people, most of whom had no idea what the real purpose of the project was. The ship turned out enormous, so big that it could not only lift K-129, but also hide it entirely inside. In the middle of the vessel, a giant empty space. In the bottom, huge doors like the mouth of a sea monster. From this mouth would emerge the grabbing device, a 3-mile-long metal arm with claws at the end. The system was controlled by computers designed specifically for the mission by scientists from the space program. But the hardest part was the people. The crew of the Explorer wasn't made up entirely of CIA agents. Most were regular sailors, without whom the ship couldn't operate. They couldn't be told the truth, but they would see everything with their own eyes. Each sailor was carefully screened, their background, family, political beliefs, all examined. Then came special training. The crew studied basic Russian, not to speak with Russians, but to read markings on the recovered submarine. Nuclear, radioactive, danger. Every sailor needed to recognize these words. They were warned. There would be bodies on board the Soviet sub. Dozens of corpses underwater for 6 years. They had to be mentally prepared. And most important, if anything went wrong, if they were caught, the US government would immediately deny any connection. Officially, they weren't on that ship. Officially, the ship didn't exist. Young engineer David Sharp wrote in his journal, "My hands shake when I think about what we're about to do. We're about to raise the dead. This isn't intelligence work. This is grave robbery. But if there really are secrets down there that could shift the balance of power in the world, then..." President Nixon personally signs the authorization for the mission. The document contains one line: "I approve the execution of the project as outlined." No further details. If the mission fails, the president can say, "I knew nothing about it." July. The Global Explorer departs from the port of Los Angeles, officially to mine manganese. In reality, on the most daring theft in human history. On board are 150 people. Less than half know the truth. The rest can only guess. Everyone understands. Something extraordinary is happening here. The ship's captain receives a sealed envelope with coordinates: 40 degrees north latitude, 180 degrees west longitude, a spot in the Pacific Ocean where K-129 sank 6 years ago. The trip to the target takes several days. The crew runs drills and checks the equipment. The recovery system weighs hundreds of tons and is operated remotely. One malfunction, and everything will sink to the bottom. John Parangoski hasn't slept in a week. He knows this mission could decide not only his career, but the balance of power in the world. If the Americans get access to Soviet military secrets, US advantage will become overwhelming. If the mission fails, he'll be the scapegoat. If they're caught, he'll be the first to face a firing squad, or, if lucky, spend the rest of his life in a Soviet prison. The ship reaches the designated spot. The ocean is calm, visibility is good. Perfect conditions to begin the operation. But then, something happens that nearly ruins the entire mission. A silhouette appears on the horizon. A Soviet ship. A rescue tug. A small vessel the USSR often uses for intelligence gathering under the guise of civilian operations. On the bridge of the Explorer, there's panic. Have they been spotted? Do the Soviets know about the operation? The tug slowly approaches, as if studying the American ship. On board the Explorer, they prepared to destroy all classified documents. Metal boxes filled with papers are placed by the railings. One command, and they'll be dumped into the sea. The crew waits. 1 hour, 2. The Soviet ship circles at a distance of several miles. It doesn't come closer, but it doesn't leave either. What are they doing? Watching? Waiting for backup? Or did they just happen to be in the area? The radar operator whispers to his partner. They're observing us, counting antennas, measuring dimensions. If they send the coordinates to Moscow, we'll be surrounded by half the Soviet Navy within 24 hours. On the third day, the Soviet tug unexpectedly begins to approach. Distance, half a mile, 1,600 feet, 300 feet. The American captain sounds a warning blast. The Soviet ship keeps closing in, 150 feet. The crews of both ships can now see each other with the naked eye. And then something unbelievable happens. The Soviet sailors turn their backs to the American ship, drop their pants, and moon them, showing their bare buttocks. Laughter erupts on the Explorer. Half the crew responds in kind. The tension breaks. The Soviet tug gives 3 farewell blasts and disappears beyond the horizon. What was that? A psychological military tactic? A show of mockery? Or just sailor humor between enemies? No one knows. But the danger is finally over. The recovery of K-129 begins. The grabbing system lowers into the depths slowly, inch by inch. 3 miles, deeper than the height of the Alps. The pressure there is 500 times greater than at sea level. Any mistake, and the equipment would be crushed like an eggshell. The cameras show the ocean floor, silt stirred by currents, fish curiously inspecting the strange device. And finally, there she is. K-129 lies on her side, half buried in the seafloor. The hull is broken in 2. The explosion that killed the crew also tore the submarine apart. The grabbing arm approaches the wreck. The operator in the Explorer control room moves the claws remotely, like in a video game. But the stakes are real. The claws lock onto the front section of the sub, where the crew quarters, torpedo tubes, and some equipment are located. The rear section with the nuclear missiles is too heavy. The lift begins. 1,000 tons of dead metal slowly rise from the abyss. The operation takes several days. There's no room for haste, or the grabbing system could break. On the 4th day, disaster strikes. As the massive mechanical arm hauls the hull of K-129 from the deep, the metal trembles under immense strain. The cameras capture every second. The Soviet submarine wreck steadily rising toward the surface. The screens show flakes of rust falling off, fragments of equipment tumbling out of the broken hull. And suddenly, a terrifying screech of tearing metal. One of the claws gives way. The metal groans and 2/3 of K-129 plunge back into the abyss forever. In the control room, a heavy silence. Engineer Bob Connor slams his fist on the console. 7 years of preparation, and we lose the main prize. The nuclear missiles, the communication codes, all the most valuable stuff, back on the bottom. Hundreds of millions of dollars, years of work, and nearly everything is lost. But 1/3 of the submarine remains clutched in the grabbing device. Finally, from the dark water, a silhouette appears. The piece they managed to save. Covered in rust, tangled in seaweed, the fragment of the Soviet sub looks like a ghost from the deep. The crew of the Explorer holds their breath. Before them, a piece of enemy territory. Metal forged by Soviet workers. Weapons that could have destroyed American cities. The wreckage is hauled inside the ship. The bottom doors close. The main part of the mission begins. Examination and analysis. Specialists in protective suits approach the wreckage. The Geiger counters crackle. Radiation levels are elevated. The submarine had nuclear warheads and their radiation is still dangerous. First, they open the crew quarters and see what they were trained for, but are still shocked by. Bodies, skeletons in blue Soviet Navy jackets, some with medals on their chests. One has a photo of a woman and child in his pocket. Another, a letter in Russian, written in neat handwriting. In the captain's cabin, they find an unfinished letter to his wife. "My dear Irina, I don't know if this will reach you, but I have to say, after that, blurred ink. The seawater turned the words into unreadable smudges. The American sailors work in silence. Before them are not just enemies, but people. People who had families, hopes, dreams. Men who died doing their duty. Sergeant Mike O'Connell whispers to his partner, "Look at this photo. Wife, kid. He wanted to come home just like us. And now we're digging through his grave." In the torpedo room, they find documents. Most are ruined by water, but some can still be decoded. Communication codes, equipment diagrams, weapons manuals. The most valuable find is in the radio room, an encryption machine with partially preserved settings. If restored, it could allow the Americans to read Soviet military messages. But time was running out. On the surface, the submarine's hull began to rapidly deteriorate. Oxygen and sudden temperature changes were taking their toll. What had remained intact for decades in the icy deep was now falling apart within hours. The work continued non-stop. Documents, equipment, and metal samples were recovered. Everything was packed into special containers for shipment to the U.S. The remains of the Soviet sailors were treated with great respect. 6 of them were identified through documents and personal belongings. Their names: Vladimir Kostyushko, Viktor Lokov, Valentin Nosatchev, and 3 of their comrades. John Parangosky made a decision that would go down in history. The Soviet submariners would be buried at sea with full military honors, under the Soviet flag. The ceremony took place at dawn near Hawaii. The American sailors stood at attention. The Soviet flag was slowly lowered into the water. A prayer was read in Russian by a consultant, a former Soviet officer who had defected to the U.S. 10 years earlier. "We are burying sailors who died in the line of duty," said the American captain. "They were our adversaries, but they were warriors, and they deserve respect." Operation Azorian was complete, but that was only the beginning of its consequences. The CIA planned a second mission, Matador. The goal: return and recover the rest of K-129, including the nuclear missiles. That was where the real treasure lay. But in late autumn, an anonymous note was left at the door of the Soviet embassy in Washington. "The Americans are raising a Soviet submarine in the Pacific Ocean." At first it was ignored. It sounded too incredible. But a few months later, the story leaked to the press. The Los Angeles Times published a front-page article, "CIA raised Soviet submarine." The details were inaccurate, but the core was correct. The story spread across all media outlets. The whole world learned about Operation Azorian. Project Matador was immediately canceled. Returning to the K-129 wreck site was now impossible. The entire world was watching. How did journalists find out about the secret mission? There are many theories. Some say the offices of Howard Hughes's company were burglarized and documents were stolen. Others claim that high-ranking officials who opposed the mission leaked the information. The true source of the leak remains a mystery to this day. The USSR stayed officially silent. A public protest would have meant admitting, "We lost a nuclear submarine and couldn't find it." Too humiliating for a superpower. In private, the Soviet ambassador expressed concern about the publications in the American press. The US denied everything. Officially, Operation Azorian never existed. Officially, the ship Global Explorer never existed. Officially, nothing ever happened. But unofficially, everything had changed. Operation Azorian proved that during the Cold War, there were no limits to boldness. For military advantage, superpowers were willing to do anything. Steal a submarine with nuclear weapons? No problem. Spend hundreds of millions of dollars on a mission with a 10% chance of success? Absolutely. It was a show of strength, a message to Moscow. We can find and recover your secrets from any depth. There's nowhere to hide. But the operation also had the opposite effect. The USSR realized that American technology was far more advanced than they had thought. If the US could raise a submarine from 3 miles deep, what else could they do? The arms race gained new momentum. Both sides began developing even more sophisticated methods of espionage and counter-espionage. The families of the fallen Soviet submariners didn't learn the truth until 24 years later. In 1992, CIA Director Robert Gates came to Moscow on an official visit. He was the first head of American intelligence to visit the Russian capital after 50 years of hostility. As a gesture of goodwill, he handed President Boris Yeltsin the Soviet flag that had been used in the burial ceremony for the K-129 sailors. In a video recording of that ceremony, Irina Zhuravina, widow of the submarine's deputy commander, watched the tape with tears in her eyes. Her husband had been buried by the enemy, with honors that his own country had never given him. In 1998, on the 30th anniversary of the tragedy, all the fallen submariners were posthumously awarded medals for bravery. Their families were brought to the site of K-129's final resting place. The ship reached the coordinates: 40 degrees north latitude, 180 degrees west longitude. Irina Zhuravina, now elderly, her hair silver, tossed flowers into the water, to the place where, 3 miles below, in total darkness and silence, her husband rests. "Sasha, I finally found you," she whispered. But even today, more than half a century later, Operation Azorian remains one of the most secretive missions in CIA history. Most of the documents are still inaccessible to researchers. Why? What did the Americans find on K-129 that remains hidden to this day? Officially, nothing remarkable. A few torpedoes, fragments of equipment, and documents of limited value. The nuclear missiles and the most important secrets remained in the part of the submarine that broke off and sank back to the ocean floor. But there are details that make one question the official version. First, the scale of secrecy. The operation was classified more heavily than the development of the atomic bomb. Why such extreme secrecy over limited value? Second, the sudden technological leap the U.S. experienced in the 1970s. Unexpected breakthroughs in metallurgy, electronics, and underwater technology. Many innovations emerged right after Operation Azorian. Coincidence? Unlikely. Third, strange details in the declassified fragments of documents. Mentions of non-standard materials, anomalous radiation levels, unknown design principles. A former CIA analyst who requested anonymity told reporters in 2019, "What we found on K-129 changed our understanding of Soviet capabilities. They were far ahead in some areas, so far it almost seemed impossible." When asked for details, he replied, "I signed a non-disclosure agreement for 75 years. My kids will know the truth after I'm gone." Another source from the Pentagon hinted at even more intriguing details. In the 1960s, the USSR was working on technologies we considered science fiction at the time. Communication systems that could function at any depth underwater, materials that don't rust or degrade, energy sources of unknown origin. Is it possible that K-129 wasn't just a regular submarine, but a test platform for secret technologies? That its mission wasn't routine patrol, but the testing of revolutionary systems? That would explain why the Americans spent hundreds of millions of dollars on a mission with minimal chances of success. They knew something was on board K-129, something worth any cost and any risk. In classified Nevada labs, analysts studied metal samples from the Soviet submarine. Dr. Frank Peterson, a metallurgist with 30 years of experience, wrote in his report, "The alloys demonstrate properties that fall outside the bounds of modern science. Some samples retain their structure at temperatures that should have melted them. Others show abnormal resistance to corrosion, as if Soviet scientists had discovered laws of physics still unknown to us." There are even more shocking claims. A worker from one of the labs that studied the K-129 debris reported, "Among the wreckage, we found a device about the size of a suitcase. It was made from a material our spectrometers couldn't identify. When connected to a power source, it generated several times more energy than it consumed. It violated the basic laws of thermodynamics." The device disappeared from the lab a week after its discovery. All records about it were classified indefinitely. Staff were forbidden to discuss the find, even among themselves. Could it be that K-129 was carrying not just Soviet military technology, but something even more mysterious? Technology that the USSR may have acquired from an unknown source and was studying in absolute secrecy? That would explain why the documents about Operation Azorian remain classified. Not because they contain typical military secrets, but because they contain information that could overturn our understanding of technological progress. One thing is certain: What the Americans recovered from the wreck of K-129 had a massive impact on the development of American technology in the following decades. Many breakthroughs in computing, materials science, and energy occurred in the 1970s and 1980s. Coincidence? Or the result of studying Soviet technological secrets? We can only guess. The truth is buried under a top-secret label and will likely remain hidden for many more years. But maybe the documents aren't classified because of Soviet technology. Maybe it's for an entirely different reason. What if the Americans are hiding not what they found on K-129, but how it sank? Officially, the cause of the explosion has never been determined. Among the wreckage, the Americans found evidence of a powerful detonation, but the source remains unknown. Several theories exist, and each one is disturbing in its own way. The first, an accidental launch of a ballistic missile while submerged. That would have instantly torn the submarine's hull apart. But the R-21 missiles had multiple layers of safeguards to prevent accidental firing. Nearly impossible. The second, a torpedo explosion caused by hydrogen peroxide in the weapons bay, similar to what later happened on the Kursk. U.S. reports mention a strange double sound. First a soft impact, then a massive detonation. But what caused that first impact? And there's a third theory, one that explains why the documents related to Operation Azorian remain classified to this day. A collision with an American submarine. The USS Swordfish did in fact return to a Japanese port around that time with serious damage. Officially, an iceberg. But there are no icebergs in that part of the Pacific Ocean. It's possible that Operation Azorian wasn't just about stealing Soviet secrets, but a desperate attempt to cover up the United States' own guilt. Perhaps that's why Congress so willingly approved hundreds of millions of dollars, not to obtain Soviet technology, but to eliminate evidence. Because what could be more terrifying for the US government than admitting we accidentally sank an enemy submarine carrying nuclear missiles and nearly triggered World War III? One thing is certain, Operation Azorian changed the rules of the game between superpowers forever. It proved that in the world of espionage, nothing is impossible. That in the pursuit of strategic advantage, people are willing to risk everything. And most importantly, it proved that the most unbelievable stories often turn out to be true. In a world where one superpower can secretly steal another submarine, even the wildest conspiracy theories begin to feel real. K-129 still lies on the floor of the Pacific Ocean. Part of it was recovered by the Americans. The rest remains in the abyss, perhaps forever, along with secrets that could explain many of the mysteries of the Cold War. The crew of K-129 became heroes few have heard of. 98 men who died in the line of duty. Their names are engraved on a memorial in St. Petersburg, but their true story, the story of the boldest theft in human history, remains a secret. Somewhere in the basements of the CIA, in vaults behind triple-locked doors, there are documents and samples that could explain it all. Documents that reveal what really happened in the cold waters of the Pacific. And as long as those archives remain sealed, we can only speculate about what secrets lie on the ocean floor with the remains of the Soviet submarine. Because in the world of espionage, the greatest secret is the one everyone knows about, but no one dares to speak aloud. A secret so important, it remains protected even half a century after the Cold War ended. The story of Operation Azorian is a story of how far people are willing to go for power, knowledge, and an edge over the enemy. It's a lesson about the price of secrets and how in chasing them, humanity can be lost. But it is also a story of courage, of the Soviet submariners who died in the ocean depths, and the American sailors who risked their lives to carry out an impossible mission. And perhaps one day, we'll learn the full truth about what really lay aboard K-129, about what technologies the Americans discovered, about what destroyed that submarine, and how it changed the course of history. Today on the ocean floor lies what the Americans couldn't steal, a Soviet secret that could have changed everything. Nuclear missiles capable of turning entire cities into ash, codes that could unlock military intelligence, technologies decades ahead of their time, and maybe someday, someone will dare to dive down there to discover what the US failed to retrieve. Until then, this remains a story about one of the boldest spy operations ever. An operation that nearly turned the Cold War into a nuclear one. And until that day comes, we must remember, in the depths of the ocean lie not only ships and sailors, but secrets powerful enough to change our world. No wonder China has been conducting mysterious oceanographic research for several years, right in the square where, in the cold darkness of the deep sea, the wreckage of the Soviet submarine with nuclear missiles still rests.